I will doing everything possible to hold the Swedish the presidency accountable, that we do not allow these policies to break through at the EU level. We need a humane and solid migration policy that shows solidarity, a climate policy that can give a better future to future generations. And we need to ensure that we can have democracy in all member states. That's something that I think that we should be looking forward to. There's not one day to lose in this presidency, not one day to lose in the battle against Putin and Orbán. Sorry.
Köszönöm a szót, kedves elnök asszony, tisztelt miniszterelnök úr! A svéd elnökség, ahogy hallhattuk, elkötelezett az Európai Unió egységének megőrzése mellett. Nos, az EU egységének megőrzéséről beszélni jó szándékú tévedés. Az Unió egységét ugyanis a fősodratú brüsszeli politika az elmúlt években szétverte. Ennek a következménye és bizonyítéka a Brexit, az EU második legnagyobb és legerősebb tagállamának a kilépése az Unióból.
Tamás, I'm sorry, but there's no interpretation. We haven't heard,
We have a technical problem.
Does it work now? Sorry, Tamás. Yeah. Should work now. Go ahead. You can start over. Microphone. Okay.
Köszönöm a szót, kedves elnök asszony, tisztelt miniszter.
Thank you, Madam President. Prime Minister. Yes, the Swedish presidency is taking action to preserve European unity, but preserving European unity is erroneous because there is no such unity since the Brussels bureaucracy, Brussels politics has broken down that unity. Brexit is the proof of this, namely the second biggest member state left the EU. That is a result of Brussels politics. As for illegal migrants, the member states that are in the front line are basically being left alone. Traditional European values, religion, family, nation, are now the targets of Brussels policy. The sovereignty of the member states is to be undermined, and that has destroyed the unity of the Union. Our job now is to restore the unity of the European Union, and for that we need a turnaround. We need a different Brussels policy, namely upholding the treaties, and we must respect European diversity.
Siegfried Mureşan for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, President. Prime Minister, welcome to the European Parliament, and thank you for assuming this important role of leadership on behalf of all of the European Union in these important times. Let me address two topics. Firstly, competitiveness. The Swedish government is absolutely right to putting competitiveness high on the agenda of the European Union in this first half of the year, because we can only ensure high standards of living in Europe. We can only ensure high social standards if our economy is competitive, if our economy is strong, if we produce goods that are demanded on the global markets. To support the competitiveness of our economy, in the Conference on the Future of Europe, Prime Minister, we have proposed the introduction of a competitiveness check at European level, which means that whenever the European Commission will propose legislation in the future, it should make sure that this improves, it strengthens the competitiveness of our economy, it does not affect it. And Prime Minister, my kind request to you is to make sure that we work together, because this idea was supported in the Conference on the Future of Europe by governments, by Commission, by citizens, by European Parliament and national parliaments. Let's work together for this idea to see the light of the day. Second topic, the enlargement of the Schengen area. Unfortunately, under the previous EU presidency, we could not unanimously agree on the accession of Bulgaria and Romania to the Schengen area, although these countries fulfill all of the required conditions, as the European Commission has repeatedly said. This is why, Prime Minister, let us keep this topic high on the agenda to make sure we can fulfill this commitment, because as the accession of Finland and Sweden to NATO would make us all safer, the accession of Bulgaria and Romania to the Schengen area would also make us all safer. Thank you very much. Let's deliver.
Thank you, Siegfried. Next, for 1 minute, Eero Heinäluoma.
Fru talman!
Madam President, Sweden has had an important and constructive role in previous presidencies. Swedish foreign policy is well known and respected. Similarly, Sweden has always stood up for democracy, human rights and equality. But now questions are being asked about how the new government will be performing. Will it be different from the approach taken by previous presidencies? Prime Minister, it is very worrying that your government is dependent upon an extreme right party for support. In the European Parliament, we hope that Sweden continues to fight with strong engagement for the rule of law and democracy. Support for Ukraine has to continue without the shadow of a doubt. Strong measures will be required to stop climate change. Reform of the electricity market is something that our citizens are clamoring for. But let's not forget the important work that Sweden needs to do for a social Europe. Equality and better working conditions, particularly for platform workers, are on the agenda. Without a social Europe, we have no Europe at all.
Next is Karen Karlsbro for 1.5 minutes.
Fru talman,
Madam President, Commission, Prime Minister. Well, if one thing is taken for given, it's European cooperation. Europe has developed from a battle to being one of the world's best places to live, with freedom and democracy. But this didn't happen all on its own. The EU is the result of compromises and democratic cooperation. It is what it is, thanks to will, power and visions. I'm glad that Ulf Kristersson has been so clear that Sweden, as the presidency country, will be working hard for the values that we most highly value. The message to Hungary and Poland and to all the right-wing populists in Europe is totally clear. That has to mean that if you don't accept the rules of the game, there are consequences. If you turn your back on the EU's values, then you're also saying no to funds. Europe is not a cash point. A strong democratic EU is required if we are going to continue to develop the EU as the world's greatest environmental organization. That Europe has to take the lead in climate cooperation. You cannot allow climate denialism to put the brakes on for EU climate work. So I'm very pleased to see that the presidency wants to go the final straight on the EU's climate package and bring it home to port. Ukraine is not just fighting for its own existence, but it's fighting for us. We have to continue to give Ukraine our full support. We're looking forward to a successful half year ahead of us. Thanks.
5 minutes now.
Herr Premierminister Kristersson, Sie übernehmen den Ratsvorsitz einer...
Prime Minister Kristersson, you take on the Council presidency in a tense time. The EU is seeming to get through winter than we all felt, but it's still not the time to breathe out. We need a Council presidency prepared to be courageous and to put aside its national positions. We need a Council presidency that clearly can acknowledge EU cooperation and deliver the goods. And to be quite honest, we Greens have strong doubts about whether you'll do that. Your alliance, which tolerates a far-right EU opposing partner, is destroying a lot of trust in Europe. The good reputation of the Swedish reputation of the Swedish government in Europe has been destroyed. You need to show that you are going to live up to the democratic traditions of your predecessors and work and deliver for Europe as a whole. In a crisis, we can't afford a council presidency which is dependent on the Swedish far right. We need a council presidency which unambiguously stands behind the EU position. We need a council presidency that is unambiguously on the side of the rule of law, minorities, and strengthening the EU institutions. We need a council presidency that is also prepared to take new steps. We are happy that you see competitiveness and industrial policy as priorities, and we salute Northvolt and other innovative Swedish corporations, but what are they calling for? Active EU industrial policy, an EU fund with common strategic investments in green technologies and setups. So clear the path for that. Otherwise, we'll just see the financing blocked all the time. We need new blueprints on the table now. Thank you.
This on for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear Prime Minister of Sweden. The
Swedish presidency during the first half of this year is going to be a very important one, particularly if we consider that Sweden has finally got a decent right-wing government. Sweden is an example, a sad example, of the effects of uncontrolled immigration and how that could damage the lives of future generations, our children and grandchildren. And this is an acute problem across the EU. You should always ask the Sweden Democrats for advice on this issue, because they have been warning of these dangers for many years. That's why I hope that Sweden's presidency will put greater weight on the need to control Europe's external borders, prevent illegal immigration, and primarily stand up for security and a future for Europe's different nationalities. No less important for this presidency has to be energy policy. The Swedish government has already shown some healthy common sense by restarting the promotion of nuclear power. But common sense is also going to be needed during the presidency. Now we need the EU to walk back on its talk of a green revolutionary utopia, which is not realistic either economically or even in preventing climate change. Finally, I would also like to thank Sweden for its decision to increase its defence expenditure, again in the context of Russian aggression, which is important for Sweden itself, but also for Northern Europe and Estonia. I'd like to wish you strength and success, and I hope that Sweden will partially repair some of the damage that's already been done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jaak. Next is Carlo Fidanza for 1 minute.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Prime Minister, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, the new centre-right Swedish government will be at the helm of the Council at a time where we are being rocked by the dramatic consequences of the war in Ukraine. We have to increase our defence capacity to fight against external threats. We have to fight against illegal migration. On the 9th and 10th of February, there will be an extraordinary council to start on this. We need to send people back and to focus on migration. We also have to make sure we have innovative tools for our businesses and not old damaging recipes for the internal market. We've got to make sure we have security of energy supply and the same when it comes to commodities and raw materials. We have to make sure that the green transition is more sustainable from economic and social point of view. We have to be very concrete, and I think it can be done. Best of success.
Nikolai Willumsen for 1 minute.
Prime Minister, the Swedish EU presidency has many challenges: war, energy crisis, climate battle, and a grotesquely growing economic inequality, also here in Europe. These are all important areas, but today I would like to focus on something which is too often overlooked, that is, working conditions for most people. Your presidency will be negotiating about both the Platform Directive and about the EU's new rules for asbestos. In both cases, it's important that protection of workers is central. We must protect the rights of platform workers. We should not protect the profits of the great platform giants. And we should also protect millions of EU citizens' lives and health from the deadly asbestos. I hope Sweden will contribute to that. Don't just look at profits in the short term. That will cost us much more in the long term. Ulf Kristersson, it's time to start working for most people.
This is Nicolas Bay for 1 minute.
Monsieur le Premier ministre,
Prime Minister, the right is back in power in Sweden and Europeans already reaping the benefits. Stockholm made it clear very quickly its EU presidency would not be the presidency of migrant redistribution. After decades of openness and unlimited reception, with 1/5 of the population having been born abroad, it is very clear there's been a huge increase in the number of homicides, rapes, thefts, and police stations being attacked with hand grenades. Mass migration, even in a country which is the most generous in the world, is a resounding failure that has turned some cities of the Scandinavian paradise into Afghan suburbs. We have to make sure that we don't have more migrants arriving here. Some ideas to develop during your presidency, Prime Minister, instead of receiving illegal migrants, expelling them, instead of disarming Frontex, giving them the right means to protect our borders, instead of applauding the NGOs that are complicit in human trafficking, pointing the finger at them and sanctioning them. Stockholm has returned to its senses. Let's hope that Brussels follows its example.
Xavier Benami pour 1 minute et demie.
merci Madame la Présidente, Monsieur le Premier ministre.
Thank you, Madam President. Prime Minister, welcome to Strasbourg. The Swedish presidency is opening, as you recalled, at a time of major crisis, and I'd like to thank you because in this context you are, through your government, demonstrating it's possible to repair Europe. You say you want a greener, safer, more free Europe. Greener, not against science, but as you do, basing yourself on the best of European intelligence, in particular the nuclear industry, which will help us get beyond carbon more safely. And, of course, we haven't been able to stop things entering Europe, but we've tried to control the border. And you talk about a safer Europe, spending more money doesn't necessarily make our societies more prosperous. We're trying to allow freedom and leaving member states their role and responsibility. Prime Minister, we face existential challenges. In the wonderful journey of Nils Elderson, Maluf said that intelligence makes us stand out amongst princes, but I think you will demonstrate that intelligence and that wisdom. You can rely on your political family, the EPP, for supporting you in that route, despite all the adversity and despite the denials of reality that continue to prosper in the EU institutions. We need a strong Swedish presidency to repair Europe and strengthen it in the dreadful international context we are familiar with today. Prime Minister, good luck.
Adesso Brando Benifei.
Brando Benifei, 1 minute.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President Metsola. Prime Minister, Sweden takes up the baton at a crucial historical moment. We have to make sure that we work towards a greener Europe that will be a trailblazer when it comes to climate neutrality up to 2050, reducing net emissions by at least 55% by 2030. Let us not stop and let us not go backwards. We need those who are dealing with migration to stick together. You cannot look the other way. You cannot postpone the work on the Migration Pact to 2024. This is unacceptable. We cannot be held hostage by vetoes and a certain approach by throwing a spanner in the works and not coming up with a joint solution. Now, artificial intelligence is also very important. I'm eagerly awaiting negotiations together with Mr. Tudorache, the co-rapporteur, but I would like to tell you the European Parliament is going to stand firm and make sure that we don't have mass biometric surveillance of people and the lowering of standards. We need a more united and stronger Europe closer to its citizens. Thank you. Mr. Danti, 1 minute.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam President, Prime Minister, colleagues. The Swedish presidency is going to be decisive in completing quite a number of key files for this legislative term, which we're now moving into the end phase of. I'm thinking of all the measures on energy efficiency and renewables. These are important instruments for freeing ourselves from dependence on Russian gas and for solving an energy crisis. And I'm glad to see that the presidency wants a high level of ambition. I'm also pleased to see that their attention is being paid to trade, particularly important at the historical moment we face. Only by diversifying our energy sources, not giving in to the temptation to close ourselves to the world, that's the only way we can bring together sovereignty and freedom and try and solve some of the issues that have been afflicting us in recent months. But it's not all good news. There's still some amazement about some statements from the Swedish government, which has been using sovereignist language when it comes to finding a solution to the migration issues. This is a short-sighted approach. A common management of flows is the only solution. That is a decisive issue for the future of our union. Thank you.
Take a strict for 1.5 minutes.
Dear President, Council Presidency, Mr. Christensen and Commissioners. The Pact on Migration and Asylum has entered a crucial stage. The Council reached agreements on border control and security pretty rapidly, but it stalls on the question how to share responsibility. The Pact is not a pick-and-choose game. It is a package to ensure all elements, protection standards, equal division of responsibility and security measures. And it's upon the Swedish presidency to complete this whole package in time. And the success of the Pact hangs upon a strong and effective solidarity mechanism based on common responsibility. This is the key to ending pushback practices and lives lost at sea, and the key to ensuring proper asylum procedures. And it's the key we expect you to use to end the deadlock. And give me one hint. The first entry rule in the current Dublin regulation is not fair for the border countries, but it does not work in practice either. But taking common responsibility, which I think we should do, does not mean a common effort to shift it to third countries. This is what happens with prioritizing migration in all EU foreign policies. Development aid aims at reducing poverty, not at returning migrants. The idea to refuse tariff preferences to the least developed countries if they don't cooperate is a new low in this tendency of migration deals. I wish the Swedish government a successful presidency with the right sense of responsibility inside and outside the EU and a sound moral compass. Thank you.
Thank you, Tineke. I don't see Teuvo Hakkarainen, so we'll go straight to Bogdan Ronsa. 1 minute.
Thank you. Są prawicowe partie I są prawicowi wyborcy.
So we have right-wing parliaments, we have right-wing voters. That's why there are right-wing governments who will bring back competitiveness and order in our European Union. And we're very pleased that the Swedish Prime Minister has set out some very reasonable priorities, which we accept and we support. We're pleased that everyone is in favor of energy independence and nuclear energy in particular, because that will ensure stability in the European Union. We, of course, have to think about refugees, and we have to reduce illegal immigration to the European Union, because the illegal immigration causes a lot of problems for us within the Union. We have to do away with the corruption, starting with the European Parliament. I mean, the European Parliament has criticized Poland for not respecting law and order. What about law and order in this House? And we also need to be economically competitive and not ideologically opposed to Asia and the United States just because we don't like them. Thank you.
Is next for 1.5 minutes.
Commissioner, Prime Minister, President, I'm very much looking forward to the Swedish presidency because I'm sure that two areas that are close to my heart will be dealt with. First of all, competitiveness of the European economy, and secondly, concrete measures for solving the migration crisis. First of all, I think everyone in this Parliament is interested in what our companies need to be successful, innovative and competitive. Ultimately, it's only our entrepreneurs that create jobs. At the moment, there's aggressive competition for where to locate investments, and that's why it's important that we provide support to our companies. But nevertheless, we need to deal with the subject of excess bureaucracy, because this is leading to more relocations outside Europe. And we need the measures that we have been taking in recent years have led to more bureaucracy for entrepreneurs rather than less. The Swedish members in the EPP are doing an excellent job, and I hope that you will help us to fight against the bureaucratic monster. Secondly, on the subject of migration, the European Union once again is facing a migration crisis. In my region of Austria, we are some of the most affected regions, and we are taking on more refugees than pretty much any country in Europe. The Council and the Parliament have already committed themselves to implementing the objectives of the Asylum and Migration Pact. And with your Swedish experience, I'm sure that we'll find a good solution. Best of luck.
Moreno Sanchez for 1 minute.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Vice President, Prime Minister, of course, your presidency has to continue fleshing out the policies linked to the priorities of our societies, the fight against inflation and climate change. But today I'd like to talk about an outstanding issue. If we don't tackle it, there will be medium-term and long-term problems, and that's migration policy, especially legal migration paths. All the studies show that we need more manpower in the EU, and we have moved towards a health union and an energy union. Let's do the same when it comes to common migration policy. That is why we have to give the green light to the Migration and Asylum Pact now. And that is why we also have to develop legal migration paths, especially when it comes to the single permit and long-term workers. We're working very hard and quickly here in the European Parliament to achieve that, and we count on the Swedish presidency to help reach a consensus in the Council and the Commission. President, Vice President, Prime Minister, I hope you have a safe, secure, healthy and sustainable year. Thank you.
Next is Dragos Tudorache for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear Prime Minister, many priorities: Ukraine, energy, migration, economy, many important debates and decisions to come. I'm confident you will fulfill your objectives, and together with many of my colleagues, you have our support for doing that. But I wish to put on your political radar, just like my colleague did a few minutes ago, the issue of Schengen for Romania and Bulgaria, because whatever happened at the JHA Council in December erodes the very logic of how the Council works. We had over years many examples of member states abusing unanimity, playing their vetoes for political gain, but at the end of the day, there was always a trade-off that allowed the majority to prevail, that allowed reason to prevail. In December, we didn't have that. We had a member state that simply said no, that accepted no evidence, no facts, no arguments, that ignored all efforts by the presidency, by the Commission, by fellow member states to find solutions. In fact, it wanted no solution. And such unwillingness to compromise is a precedent that erodes the Council's cohesion and pushes European citizens to lose faith in how Europe serves them. You must now work to reverse this precedent, and the sooner you do this, the better. This Parliament has been a consistent advocate for completing Schengen integration. We can count on our support in the months to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dragos. Next is Kirin Ka for 1 minute.
Signora Presidente Christensen, onorevoli colleghi, per far fronte alla crisi del costo della vita,
President, Prime Minister, to deal with the cost of living crisis exacerbated by the energy crisis and with the climate crisis, we have a simple solution, which is to insulate homes. As rapporteur for the revision of the energy performance in buildings report, I would like the EU and the member states to tackle this crisis simultaneously. They're responsible for a third of greenhouse gas emissions in the EU. A restructuring plan at a European level would create hundreds of thousands of jobs locally and would contribute to tackling these two crises with ambitious minimum standards for energy performance. We could put behind us energy poverty that is crippling many millions of Europeans, and this would be a social safeguard and protect those at most at risk. I do hope that there will be productive negotiations with the Swedish presidency. Thank you.
Next is Harald Wilimski for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I'd like to express my pleasure that in Sweden we have a government in control that has turned away from this leftist path that has brought Sweden into so much trouble in recent years. And now we have Sweden as the Council presidency, and I think that we're in good hands. I've known the Sweden Democrats for many years. They're a party that does good, fair politics for their own country, and they are also responding to a large part of public opinion in Europe. I could mention Hungary, where Viktor Orban has won fair elections. In Italy, we've got Meloni and Salvini in power. There's the situation in Poland. And I could also mention the situation in my own country, in Austria, where we are pursuing policies that are now breaking through and that are creating positive momentum that really support diversity on our continent, so that cultures can come together in friendship. We should be turning away instead from a policy of mass migration, abuse of our social welfare systems, abuse of our asylum systems. Let's hope that we can push Europe into a better future. The diversity of cultures is the precondition for ensuring that our continent will be prosperous and do well, so that we as an EU can do well, so we don't end up with some mishmash situation where all cultures end up losing at the end of the day and people turn away from Europe. Thank you very much.
Rowson for 1 minute.
Voorzitter. Meneer de premier.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Prime Minister, attach great importance to the protection of life before birth. So I urge you in a very simple way, do not impose this populist these morals on others and stopping life before it comes to life, because life is a gift from God. So I appeal to you for your support And of course, is the issue of freedom of religion and belief. In order to get enough staff, I think this is crucial. We need to make sure that we have a considerable budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Commissioner, Prime Minister.